The first time I realized my family could erase me without raising their voices was at my sister's wedding rehearsal when my name was missing from the seating chart like I had never existed. I'm Claire Holloway. I was 31 that summer, old enough to know when something is wrong, young enough to still believe blood means protection. I stood in the ballroom of the Lakeshore Inn, holding a folded program with my sister Lily's name, embossed in gold, watching strangers take seats where I thought I belonged. My parents moved through the room smiling, greeting relatives, their hands never once reaching for me. No one said, "Claire, come sit here." No one asked where I was supposed to be. I told myself it was a mistake, a printer error, a detail that didn't matter. That's how it always starts. A small injustice you're trained to excuse. Lily spotted me near the back and waved her smile-tight eyes, already sliding past me, to the bridesmaids, waiting for instructions. "Hey," she said, lowering her voice. "Can you grab the extra place cards from the car? We're short." I nodded and turned before she could see my face change. That was the first hook, the first tug on a thread I didn't know was wrapped around my throat. I grew up believing our family was close. Not perfect, but solid. My father, Thomas Holloway, built a regional property management company. From a single duplex into a respectable family business. My mother, Ellen, handled the books and the social glue. Lily, 2 years younger than me, was the favorite, in a way no one ever acknowledged out loud. She was brighter, prettier, easier. I was the dependable one, the one who stayed late, helped with spreadsheets, picked up my grandmother Ruth on Sundays, and never complained. After college, I joined the family company full-time. Not because I couldn't find work elsewhere, but because they asked me to. "It'll be temporary," Dad said, "until Lily's done with grad school. Temporary has a way of becoming permanent when you're useful and quiet." By the time I was 30, I'd streamlined tenant operations, renegotiated vendor contracts, and quietly saved the company from a lawsuit that could have wiped us out. No title change, no promotion, just more responsibility and the occasional, "We couldn't do this without you." At Christmas that year, my bonus was a bottle of wine and a thank you card, signed by my mother in her careful cursive. Lily got a down payment gift for a condo she later flipped for profit. I didn't say anything. I never did. The wedding was supposed to be a celebration. That's what everyone said. A reset. Family togetherness. I bought a navy dress, took time off work, and even helped plan the rehearsal dinner. I paid for the custom menus myself when Mom said the budget was tight. So when I came back inside with the place cards and realized there was still no seat for me, something hardened in my chest. During dinner, I sat at a side table with distant cousins. My father gave a speech about legacy and family values. My mother dabbed her eyes. Lily laughed and leaned into her fiancé Mark, who kept glancing around the room like he was counting exits. I noticed things then that I hadn't allowed myself to see before. The way my parents' smiles never reached me. The way Lily accepted praise for work she hadn't done. The way my absence made everything smoother. After dessert, my grandmother Ruth motioned me over. She was 92, sharp-eyed, her hands folded neatly over her cane. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine," I replied out of habit. She studied me for a long moment. "They didn't tell you, did they?" My stomach dropped. "Tell me what?" Her lips pressed together. "Never mind. Not tonight." She patted my hand. "We'll talk after the wedding." That sentence followed me like a shadow. At the reception, I watched my family dance without me. I slipped out early, citing a headache. No one stopped me. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a group text titled "Holloway Family Updates." Lily had added Mark's parents, cousins, even co-workers. There were photos from the night before. I wasn't in any of them, not even in the background. 2 days later, I was back at the office. Same desk, same view of the parking lot. My father called me into his office around noon. He didn't look up when I entered. "We need to talk about your role here," he said, as if discussing the weather. I waited. With Lily getting married and Mark joining the company, he continued, "We're restructuring, streamlining leadership." I felt my pulse in my ears. "Okay, we think it's best if you step back from day-to-day operations," my mother added from the corner chair. I hadn't noticed her there. "It's not personal. It's about balance. Step back." That phrase again. The polite version of being pushed. "So what does that mean?" I asked. Dad finally met my eyes. "We'll keep you on as a consultant. Same pay for now. Fewer hours. For now." Another phrase that meant nothing. I nodded, because that's what I'd been trained to do. I walked back to my desk and stared at the family photo taped to my monitor. Christmas, 5 years ago. We were all smiling then. Or pretending, well enough. That evening, my grandmother called. "Come by tomorrow," she said. Alone. Her house sat on a quiet street, a modest place she'd lived in for 40 years. Inside, everything smelled like lemon polish and old books. She didn't waste time. "They're changing the will," she said, looking straight at me. "They think you won't notice. They think you'll understand." My mouth went dry. "Changing it how?" She exhaled slowly. "You're being excluded." The word landed with a finality that stole my breath. Excluded. From the inheritance, from the family business, from the story I thought I was part of. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I sat there, very still, feeling something shift deep inside me. Love, I realized, had been used as a leash. Silence as a tool, and I had worn both willingly. As I drove home, my phone lit up with another message from the family thread. Thanksgiving plans. At Lily's new house. No mention of me. That was the moment I understood this wasn't about one wedding or one promotion. It was about control and the quiet expectation that I would accept whatever was handed to me. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark. Somewhere between the steering wheel and the front door, a decision formed. Not loud, not dramatic, practical. If they thought removing me would keep things calm, they had underestimated what happens when the person holding everything together finally lets go. And I hadn't even begun to act yet. The first thing I did after leaving my grandmother's house wasn't cry or call a friend. I opened a spreadsheet. That's how I cope when things start slipping out of my hands. I line them up. Facts, dates, names. I learned early that emotions are easy to dismiss, but documentation has weight. It sits on tables. It gets passed between lawyers. Judges don't care how hurt you were. They care what you can prove. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I had a working file titled Personal Affairs. Inside it were copies of emails, old contracts, internal memos, and meeting notes I'd quietly CC'd myself on over the years. At the time, it felt like good professional hygiene. Now, it felt like instinct. I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving dinner. No call, no explanation, just silence. The family group chat buzzed all day with photos of Lily's new dining room. The centerpiece, my mother had picked out my father carving the turkey like a man proud of the life he'd built. I recognized the silverware. It had been my grandmother's. I spent the day alone in my apartment, heating a frozen meal and watching the light change outside. There was a hollow feeling in my chest, not sharp, just heavy, like something had been removed and my body hadn't caught up yet. That night, I got a voicemail from my mother. "Claire, we missed you today. We assumed you needed space." Call me when you're ready. That word again. Assumed. As if my absence were a preference, not a decision they'd made for me. I didn't call back. The next week at work, my access started changing. First, my admin permissions were downgraded. Then my name disappeared from the internal org chart. I was still being paid, still logging hours, but decisions were happening without me. Meetings I used to lead were suddenly invite-only. Mark took my old office. I was moved to a smaller desk near the copier. He avoided my eyes, always smiling too broadly, like someone pretending nothing was wrong. One afternoon, as I was gathering printouts, I overheard Lily in the hallway. "Claire's great," she was saying to someone. "She's just not leadership material. She prefers support roles." I stood still, the paper warm in my hands. That was the narrative now. Not pushed out, not excluded, just unsuited. That night, I called an attorney. Her name was Janet Moore, late 50s, calm voice, reputation for handling messy family business disputes without theatrics. I found her through a quiet referral from a woman I barely knew but trusted enough to listen. Janet didn't rush me. She let me talk. I told her about the company, the will, my grandmother's warning, the slow erasure. When I finished, there was a pause. "You're not imagining this," she said finally. "But before we talk about confrontation, we need leverage." "I don't want to fight," I replied. "I know," she said. "That's why you need protection." We started with the basics. My employment contract, the original shareholder agreements, the clauses that still listed me as an operational lead. Janet pointed things out I'd never thought to question. Ambiguities, outdated amendments, language that could work in my favor if I chose to use it. "Your family relies on your silence," she said, "not your consent." That sentence stayed with me. A few days later, my grandmother Ruth asked me to come by again. She looked smaller than usual, thinner, but her eyes were clear. "They came to see me," she said without preamble. "Your parents. They wanted me to sign a codicil." My hands clenched. "Did you?" "No," she said sharply. "I told them I needed time." I exhaled slowly. "They think I'm confused," she continued. "They think age makes me pliable." She reached for my hand. "You've always been the steady one. That's why they assume you won't push back." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. She smiled just slightly. "I want you to choose yourself." The next escalation came quietly. A certified letter arrived at my apartment addressed to me from the family company. Inside was a formal notice outlining changes to my consulting role. Reduced scope, reduced compensation, effective in 30 days. No conversation, no warning. I called my father. He didn't answer. I called my mother. She did. "This isn't a good time," she said. "We're trying to keep things calm." For who, I asked. "For everyone," she replied, voice tight. I laughed then. Not loudly, just a breath of sound. "You mean for Lily?" There was silence on the line. Then, "Don't do this, Claire." "Do what?" "Make things difficult." I hung up. That night, I signed a retainer agreement with Janet. We moved carefully. No threats, no demands, just letters, requests for clarification, notices preserving my rights. Each one polite, each one precise. The kind of correspondence that makes people uneasy without giving them something to argue against. Within a week, the company's legal counsel responded. Defensive, vague. They wanted to resolve matters internally. Janet declined. At Christmas, I received a card from my parents. No gift, just a note about hope and family and the new year. Lily didn't sign it. I spent Christmas morning at my grandmother's house. She gave me a small box wrapped in plain paper. Inside was a key. "It's for the safe," she said. "In the study. There are documents I want you to have copies of." I didn't open it there. I waited until I got home. Inside the safe were old deeds, early business filings, handwritten notes from my grandfather about ownership percentages, things that had been conveniently forgotten in the current version of the family story. The more I read, the clearer it became. The company wasn't as cleanly theirs as they claimed. My contributions weren't just labor. They were structural. By New Year's, my family stopped calling altogether. No texts, no invitations, just quiet. And in that quiet, something unexpected happened. I slept better. I thought more clearly. Without the constant pressure to be agreeable, my mind felt sharper. The illusion had been that staying silent kept the peace. The truth was silence had been the price of belonging. As January began, Janet called me with an update. "They're nervous," she said. "They've started asking questions about your grandmother's estate planning." I looked out the window at the city below, lights blinking steadily. "Good," I said. "That means they're paying attention." I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger burns fast and leaves nothing useful behind. What I felt was resolve. They had removed me from the table. Now I was building something else entirely, and they had no idea how much ground they'd already lost. By February, the silence had hardened into something deliberate. No messages, no accidental run-ins. Even my mother's birthday passed without a call. I sent flowers anyway. White tulips, her favorite. She didn't acknowledge them. That was when I stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. What surprised me most wasn't the exclusion. It was how quickly my absence became convenient. At the company, Mark filled my old role badly, but confidently. He spoke in broad strokes, borrowed my phrasing without understanding the mechanics, and relied on Lily to smooth things over when clients asked questions he couldn't answer. The numbers still held for now, because the systems I'd built were resilient. They didn't need constant supervision. That had been the point. Build it right, and it runs without applause. One afternoon, a junior manager named Elise slipped into the chair across from my desk. She kept her voice low. "I don't know if I should be saying this," she began, eyes darting toward the hallway. "But they're rewriting history in meetings. They're saying you never wanted leadership, that you asked to step back." I nodded once. "Thank you for telling me." "That's it?" she asked, confused. "That's it," I said. "You did the right thing." She left looking unsettled. I stayed calm. Lies only work when they go unchallenged or undocumented. I was documenting everything. That same week, my grandmother Ruth was admitted to the hospital. Nothing dramatic. Dehydration, a minor infection. Still, the shift was immediate. My parents appeared by her bedside with an urgency I hadn't seen in years. They brought papers. They brought a notary. Ruth called me that night. "They think I'm asleep," she whispered. "They keep saying it's just to make things easier." "Don't sign anything I said." "I won't," she replied. "But I need you here." I took time off and sat by her bed the next morning. My mother barely looked at me. My father nodded stiffly, as if we were distant colleagues. Lily didn't come at all. While Ruth slept, Janet met me in the hospital cafeteria. She slid a folder across the table. "We need to talk about timing," she said. "If your grandmother's capacity is questioned, things get complicated." "I know," I replied. "Do you want to act now?" I thought about it. About the wedding, the will, the quiet way decisions had been made around me. "Not yet," I said. "But soon." The next escalation came from an unexpected place. A letter from the company's bank requesting clarification on authorized signatories. My name was still listed on legacy accounts. Someone had noticed. I forwarded it to Janet. "Interesting," she said. "They're trying to clean up loose ends." "Can they remove me?" I asked. "Not without triggering other obligations," she replied, "which they're trying to avoid." That night, Lily finally called. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, skipping any greeting. Doing what I replied, making things difficult, dragging lawyers into family matters. I kept my voice even. You changed the will. You cut me out of the company. You didn't talk to me. What part of that was family? She exhaled sharply. You always make everything transactional. No, I said. You made it transactional when you decided I was expendable. There was a pause. You could have just trusted us. I almost laughed. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. Her tone shifted then sharper. Mom's under a lot of stress. Grandma too. If something happens, don't, I said quietly. Silence stretched between us. Just stop, she said finally. Let things settle. I am letting them settle, I replied. Into their proper shape. She hung up. A week later, Janet called with a measured calm that told me something significant had moved. Your parents filed an amendment, she said. They're attempting to reclassify your past contributions as salaried labor only. No equity, no deferred consideration. And I asked, and they can't, she said. Not cleanly, not without your consent. I closed my eyes. What happens next? That depends on you. I drove to my grandmother's house that evening. She was home now, frail, but alert. We sat at her kitchen table, the same one where she taught me to balance a checkbook when I was 12. They think love means obedience, she said, stirring her tea. Your grandfather never believed that. He believed in fairness. She slid an envelope toward me. Inside was a handwritten letter dated years earlier, naming me as a successor trustee in the event of disputes. It wasn't flashy. It was careful, thoughtful. Ruth had seen this coming long before I had. Are you sure? I asked. She met my eyes. I'm sure of you. The following Monday, Janet filed notice. It wasn't a lawsuit. Not yet. It was a formal assertion of interest. A statement preserving my rights in both the estate and the company pending review. Calm, legal, unignorable. The reaction was immediate. My father showed up at my apartment unannounced that evening. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. This isn't how families handle things, he said. No, I replied. This is how people handle being excluded. You're tearing us apart, he insisted. I shook my head. You did that when you decided I didn't deserve a voice. He stared at me for a long moment, then said the thing that finally broke whatever illusion I had left. You were always the strong one. We thought you'd understand. Understand. That word again, used like a weapon. I do understand, I said. I understand exactly who you needed me to be. He left without another word. That night, I sat alone in the city, humming outside my window. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was reclamation. They had mistaken my silence for consent, my loyalty for weakness, my love for availability. They were about to learn the difference, and the next move wouldn't be theirs. March arrived with a kind of false calm, the sort that settles in right before something breaks. On the surface, nothing changed. The company kept operating. My parents stopped calling. Lily blocked me on social media, a small but telling gesture. My grandmother Ruth rested, more spoke less. But when she did, she was lucid and unwavering. The quiet wasn't peace. It was containment. Janet warned me this phase would come. They'll wait, she said. They'll hope you get tired, or scared, or lonely enough to fold. I wasn't tired. I was observant. The first sign of strain came from the family business itself. A longtime vendor reached out to me directly, confused about a contract amendment that had landed on his desk. The language was sloppy. Risk had been shifted in ways that exposed the company to penalties if timelines slipped. It was the kind of mistake I never would have allowed. I forwarded the document to Janet. They're cutting corners, she said. That usually means pressure. Pressure came from another direction, too. A distant cousin I barely spoke to sent a message asking if everything was okay. "Your mom seems stressed," she wrote. "She said you're going through something." Going through something. That was the story now. I wasn't being pushed out. I was unstable. I let it sit. A week later, the pressure sharpened. My grandmother's doctor called to discuss care planning. The tone was polite, but the implication was clear. My parents were positioning themselves as primary decision makers. I arrived at Ruth's house that afternoon to find my mother already there, rearranging papers on the dining table. "We need to talk about next steps," she said, not looking up. "I'm already part of the next steps," I replied, placing my bag down. She sighed. "This adversarial approach isn't good for anyone, especially not your grandmother." "Then stop making decisions without her," I said. Ruth emerged from the hallway, then leaning on her cane. "She's right," she said calmly. "Sit down, Ellen." My mother stiffened but complied. Ruth gestured for me to join them. "I want things clear," she said, "while I'm still able to say them." She reached into a folder and slid out a document. A revised trust summary, drafted but unsigned. "I've decided to make some changes," she continued. "Changes that reflect contribution, not convenience." My mother's face tightened. "Mom, this isn't necessary." "It is to me," Ruth replied. She turned to me. "Claire will be named executor, effective immediately upon my passing." The air went thin. "That's not fair," my mother said sharply. "You're letting her manipulate you." Ruth's gaze hardened. "I'm letting her protect what she helped build." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. That evening, Janet and I reviewed the document, line by line. Everything was clean, thoughtful. Ruth had insisted on an independent physician evaluation to confirm capacity. She had anticipated the challenge. 2 days later, my father called Janet directly. "I don't want this to get ugly," he said. "It doesn't have to," Janet replied. "But your daughter's position is lawful." "She's being vindictive." "No," Janet said evenly. "She's being prepared." The next escalation came fast. I was served with papers at my apartment. A petition to limit my involvement in Ruth's affairs, pending a capacity review. It was framed as concern, family unity, protection. Janet read it and nodded, as expected. "Are they serious?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "And they've overreached." We responded within 48 hours, submitting Ruth's physician statements, her own written declaration, and documentation of my historical involvement in her care and finances. The contrast was stark. Their narrative versus our evidence. At work, things frayed further. Mark called an emergency meeting about a budget shortfall that didn't exist. He spoke confidently, misreading numbers I'd balanced for years. When someone questioned him, Lily intervened, redirecting blame to legacy inefficiencies. Legacy, another word, repurposed to erase me. After the meeting, Elise found me again. "They're panicking," she whispered. "They keep asking who has access to what." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." That night, I opened the safe Ruth had shown me months earlier. Inside, alongside the documents, was something I hadn't fully processed at the time. A personal letter from my grandfather, written near the end of his life. In it, he described the early days of the business, the risks, the nights spent worrying about payroll. He wrote about fairness, about not confusing gratitude with entitlement. If anyone ever tries to rewrite this story, he'd written remind them it was built by many hands, not all of them loud. I closed the letter and sat quietly for a long time. The hearing was scheduled for early April. A preliminary review, not dramatic, but symbolic. A judge would decide whether my parents' petition even warranted consideration. The morning of the hearing, Lily showed up outside the courthouse. She looked different, tired, less polished. "You don't have to do this," she said as I passed. "I already am," I replied. Inside, the arguments were brief. Our documentation spoke for itself. The judge denied the petition, citing no evidence of undue influence and affirming Ruth's right to appoint whomever she chose. My parents didn't look at me as we left. That afternoon, Janet called with another update. The company's board is asking questions, she said, about governance, about conflicts of interest. Because of the family issues, I asked. Because of risk, she replied. They're starting to see the cracks. That night, Ruth called me. I don't have much energy, she said softly. But I'm glad you stood your ground. I learned from you, I replied. She paused. There's one more thing you should know. I waited. There's a clause in the trust, she said. A contingency. If there's a dispute that affects the company, certain assets are to be liquidated and redistributed. My pulse quickened. Redistributed how? She smiled, though I couldn't see it. Equitably. I hung up and sat in the dark, heart-steady mind racing. They thought this was about hurt feelings, about a wedding seat, about a will. They still didn't understand. The next phase wouldn't be quiet. And when it moved, it would move everything. April didn't announce itself with drama. It arrived like paperwork, does quietly, stamped and filed, carrying consequences no one reads until it's too late. The first notice came from the board. Not my parents. Not Lily. The board of directors of Holloway Property Group, a body I hadn't thought much about in years, because it had never needed to matter. My father had always run things like a family kitchen, informal, trusted, unquestioned. That only works until trust becomes a liability. Janet forwarded me the email with a single line. They want to talk to you. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in a neutral conference room downtown, not the company office. That detail mattered. Neutral meant cautious. It meant lawyers were already involved. I arrived early, as usual. Old habits don't die just because you stop being welcome. There were 5 board members present, 3 men, 2 women, all of them people who'd watched me work for years without ever really seeing me. They smiled politely, the way people do when they're reassessing their assumptions. One of them, a woman named Carol Finch, spoke first. We've received several inquiries recently, she said, from banks, from partners, and from counsel representing family interests. Family interests, not the company, not shareholders, family. We're concerned about governance, another board member added, and continuity. I nodded. That makes sense. They exchanged glances. Carol leaned forward. You were instrumental in building our operational systems. Your name still appears on multiple foundational documents. I'm aware, I said. Why were you removed from leadership? She asked. I didn't speculate. I didn't accuse. You'd have to ask my parents, I said calmly. I wasn't part of that decision. That answer did more than any speech could have. It framed the truth without begging for sympathy. The meeting ended with no promises, just an understanding. They were reviewing. They would be in touch. That afternoon, my father called for the first time in weeks. Did you meet with the board? He asked. Yes. You shouldn't have done that. I didn't seek it out, I replied. They contacted me. You're undermining the company. I took a breath. I'm responding to questions. He lowered his voice. This is getting out of hand. It got out of hand when you decided I didn't belong, I said. He hung up. 2 days later, the company's lender froze a line of credit pending review. It wasn't catastrophic. Not yet. But it was enough to rattle nerves. Mark panicked. Lily lashed out. Emails flew. Meetings multiplied. People started asking questions they'd never needed to ask before. And still no one apologized. I spent most of that week at my grandmother's house. Ruth was weaker now. She slept often, but when she woke, she was present. They're scrambling, she said one afternoon, watching birds gather at the feeder outside her window. Your grandfather always said panic reveals character. I don't want to hurt them, I said quietly. She looked at me. Then stop thinking of this as hurt. Think of it as truth finally being heavier than convenience. The board called again on Friday. "We're invoking the contingency clause," Carol said. "The one tied to family disputes affecting the company." My heart beat once, slow and steady. "What does that mean in practice?" "It means partial liquidation," she said. "Non-core assets. Redistribution according to original equity intent." Original equity intent. The words landed exactly where they were meant to. "Your parents are opposed," she added, "but the clause is enforceable." I closed my eyes briefly. This was the moment Ruth had warned me about. Not loud, not cruel, just inevitable. That evening, Lily showed up at my apartment. She looked frantic, hair pulled back too tight, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. This wasn't the composed bride from months ago. "You're blowing everything up," she said the moment I opened the door. I stepped aside to let her in. I didn't offer a drink. "They're talking about selling properties," she continued. "Dad's losing sleep. Mom's sick over this." I folded my arms. "You changed the will. That was Mom's idea. You took my job. You didn't want it anymore. You didn't ask." She flinched. "We thought you'd be fine." That word again. Fine. The expectation that I would absorb discomfort so others wouldn't have to. "I was fine," I said, "until you decided my place was optional." She sat down heavily. "What do you want?" I considered the question. Not emotionally, practically. "I want out," I said, cleanly. She blinked. "Out from the company, from the constant negotiation of my worth. I want what I'm legally entitled to. And then, I want distance." She stared at me. "You'd walk away?" "Yes, for money, for autonomy," I corrected. She laughed, sharp and humorless. "You sound like a lawyer." I smiled faintly. "I hired a good one." She left without another word. The following week, the board made its decision official. 2 commercial properties would be sold. Proceeds distributed according to adjusted equity recognition. My share was substantial, not extravagant, fair. My parents tried to fight it. They failed. The press didn't notice. There were no headlines, just a quiet shift in ownership and power. Ruth passed away 3 days later. The funeral was small. I sat in the front row beside Janet. My parents sat across the aisle, rigid, grieving in their own way. Lily cried openly. Mark kept his hand on her back eyes, scanning the room. After the service, my mother approached me. She would have wanted peace, she said. I met her gaze. She wanted honesty. She nodded once, as if acknowledging something she couldn't undo. The will was executed without challenge. Ruth had been meticulous. I was named executor, just as she'd said. The process was orderly, transparent. In the weeks that followed, checks were cut, accounts closed, assets transferred. And something else happened. A competitor reached out. They'd heard quietly that I was available, that I understood systems, contracts, people, that I didn't panic under pressure. They offered me a role, senior, independent, no family, no history. I accepted. On my last day as executor, I stood in Ruth's empty house, sunlight filtering through bare windows. The safe was empty now, the documents archived. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. They had taken my silence for submission, my loyalty for obligation, my love for weakness. They were wrong. Sometimes revenge isn't about punishment. It's about withdrawal, about taking your value somewhere it's recognized without conditions. As I locked the door behind me, I realized something with a clarity that surprised me. The hardest part wasn't losing my family. It was realizing how long I'd been losing myself to keep them comfortable. And I wasn't willing to do that anymore. I thought leaving would bring relief. Instead, it brought silence so wide it echoed. My new office, been at the 12th floor of a mid-rise, downtown all-glass and neutral tones. No family photos, no inherited expectations. Just a desk, a laptop, and a title I hadn't had to negotiate with blood. Senior Operations Advisor. It fit me better than I expected. The first few weeks passed in a blur of onboarding and strategy sessions. People listened when I spoke. When I said no, it was accepted without explanation. When I disagreed, it wasn't taken personally. That alone felt radical. And yet at night, I still reached for my phone, half expecting a message that never came. My parents didn't call after the will was executed. Not to argue, not to reconcile, not even to confirm details. Lily sent a single text 2 weeks later. "Hope you're okay." I didn't reply, not out of spite, out of clarity. Every response I'd ever given had been an invitation for negotiation. I wasn't negotiating anymore. The first real tremor came in May. I was reviewing a logistics proposal when Janet's name flashed on my screen. She never called without a reason. "They're in trouble," she said without preamble. Who I asked, though, I already knew. The company, your family business. The board's internal review uncovered discrepancies. What kind, I asked? Compliance, reporting, decisions being made without proper authorization. I leaned back in my chair. I wasn't surprised. When systems are held together by one quiet person, removing them doesn't cause an explosion. It causes drift, small mistakes, missed details, the kind that accumulate. "They want to talk to you again," Janet added. "No," I said simply. She paused. "You're not obligated." "I know," I replied. "And I'm not interested." That afternoon, my father emailed me for the first time since the funeral. The subject line read, "We need to talk." The body was short. "This has gone too far. Please call me." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then forwarded it to Janet without comment. She responded with a single sentence, "Do not engage directly." A week later, Lily showed up at my new office. Security called first. "There's a woman here asking for you. Says she's your sister." I closed my eyes briefly. "I'll come down." She stood in the lobby, twisting her wedding ring eyes, darting around like she expected judgment from the walls. When she saw me, she tried to smile. "You look different," she said. "So do you," I replied. We walked outside. The air was warm, heavy with the start of summer. "They're blaming me," she said suddenly, "for everything. I waited. They say I pushed you out, that I wanted the inheritance, that I manipulated Mom." Her voice cracked. I didn't think it would get this bad. I studied her face, the lines of stress, the familiar tilt of her chin when she felt cornered. "You didn't think I said gently. That's the problem." She swallowed. "Dad's talking about selling more assets. Mom's barely sleeping. Mark's looking for other jobs. And you," I asked. She hesitated. "I don't know who I am without all this." I felt a flicker of something then. Not pity, recognition. She'd grown up being favored, protected from consequences. Now they were arriving all at once. "What do you want from me?" I asked. She looked at me, eyes glossy. "Help." I shook my head. "I can't." Her face fell. "You won't." "I won't," I said. "Because every time I help you learn, you don't have to change." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I hope you figure it out," I added. "But not at my expense." She left without another word. That night, I dreamed of my grandmother's house. Empty rooms, open windows, the feeling of something finished. The next escalation came through the courts. My parents filed a challenge. Not to the will, they knew better. To the asset liquidation. They claimed misinterpretation, overreach, emotional distress. Janet handled it with surgical calm. "They're grasping," she told me. "But this will take time." "Will it affect me?" I asked. "Only if you let it," she replied. I didn't let it. Instead, I focused on building something new. At my new company, I led a restructuring project that had stalled for months. I didn't rush. I listened. I asked the questions no one wanted to answer. Within 6 weeks, we'd stabilized operations and cut costs without layoffs. My boss, a woman named Diane Keller, called me into her office one afternoon. "You have a way of seeing pressure points," she said, without making people defensive. "I've had practice," I replied. She smiled. "We're expanding. I want you to lead it." I accepted without hesitation. Meanwhile, the family drama tightened in on itself. Mark left Lily by August. Not dramatically, just a quiet separation announced through mutual friends. The company downsized. The board brought in external management. And still, my parents didn't call. Until September. My mother's voice was smaller than I remembered. "Your father's been hospitalized," she said. "It's his heart." I listened. I didn't rush to reassure. "He keeps asking for you," she added. I closed my eyes. This was the moment people always warned me about. The one meant to pull me back into old roles. Dutiful daughter, emotional support. "I'm sorry he's unwell," I said. "I hope he recovers." There was a pause. "Will you come?" I thought about it. Not emotionally. Practically. What would my presence change? Would it heal anything? Or just reopen negotiations I'd already closed? "I'm not ready," I said finally. She inhaled sharply, then exhaled. "I see." When I hung up, my hands were steady. The realization came quietly that evening as I cooked dinner alone. I wasn't being cruel. I was being consistent. For years, they decided what I could handle without asking me. Now I was deciding what I would allow. The story they told themselves was that I'd chosen ambition over family. The truth was simpler. I'd chosen boundaries over erasure. And for the first time in my life, that choice didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. October brought a different kind of cold. Not the weather, but the tone of everything connected to my old life. The legal challenge my parents filed didn't go away quietly. It slowed, stalled, then resurfaced in fragments, like something that refused to die properly. Motions without urgency, requests framed as clarifications. It was less about winning and more about staying connected, keeping a thread tied to me, whether I liked it or not. Janet called it what it was. Control withdrawal, she said. They're struggling with the fact that you can't be pulled back. I understood that better than she knew. At work, things were accelerating. Diane gave me authority over a multi-state expansion project. Real budgets, real decision-making power, the kind that doesn't come with emotional debt attached. I traveled more. Hotels blurred together. Conference rooms smelled the same everywhere. But for the first time, movement felt like choice, not escape. One night in Denver, after a 12-hour day, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and realized I hadn't thought about my family once. The absence startled me. It wasn't relief exactly. It was space. A wide, quiet interior where anxiety used to live. That space didn't last. A letter arrived at my apartment in early November. Not from a lawyer, from my mother. Handwritten, 4 pages. I read it once, then again. She wrote about regret without naming it, about how hard it is to be a parent, about how families make mistakes. She wrote about my father's health, Lily's separation, how lonely the house felt without gatherings. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She asked for understanding. At the end, she wrote, "We did what we thought was best for everyone." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Understanding without accountability is just another demand. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with friends, chosen family, people who didn't require performance to grant belonging. No one asked me to explain myself. No one hinted that I owed them my discomfort. In December, the court scheduled mediation. Janet laid out the options. You can attend, or we can decline. Either way, the law's on your side. I thought about it overnight. I'll attend, I said the next morning. But I won't negotiate. The mediation room was smaller than I expected. Neutral art, cheap coffee. My parents sat across from me, older than I remembered. Lily wasn't there. I noticed that immediately. My father avoided my eyes. My mother clasped her hands tightly, as if holding herself together. The mediator spoke first, outlining the issue. Asset redistribution, claims of unfair interpretation, emotional harm. Then he turned to me. Would you like to respond? I took a breath. Yes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list grievances. I didn't argue intent. I fulfilled my legal role, I said. I acted according to documented agreements and explicit instructions. I didn't take more than I was entitled to, and I didn't act out of malice. I paused. What's happening now isn't about assets. It's about loss of control, and that's not something I can give back. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father finally looked at me. So that's it, he asked. You're done with us. I considered the question carefully. I'm done being managed, I said. If there's a relationship left, it has to be voluntary, on all sides. The mediator cleared his throat. Perhaps a recess. There's nothing to recess, Janet said calmly. My client's position is clear. We left 30 minutes later. No agreement, no resolution, just finality. 2 days after mediation, Lily called. I almost didn't answer. I'm pregnant, she said without preamble. The words hung between us. I didn't know who else to tell, she added quickly. Mark's gone. Mom's not herself. Dad barely talks. I sat down slowly. How far along? 8 weeks. I let the silence stretch. Not as punishment, as honesty. I don't want this to be like everything else, she said. I don't want to repeat the same patterns. I believed she meant it. Wanting change and doing it are different things. I hope you don't, I said. Does that mean you'll be involved? She asked softly. I closed my eyes. This was the moment people imagine when they say blood is thicker than boundaries. The emotional ambush, dressed as reconciliation. I don't know, I said truthfully. Not yet. She exhaled shaky. I deserved that. After we hung up, sat still for a long time. The old version of me would have rushed back, offered support, repaired what others broke, made myself necessary again. I didn't. In January, the court dismissed my parents' claim. No standing, no evidence, no appeal. Janet sent me the order with a single word in the subject line. Done. That night, I poured a glass of wine and stood by my window, watching the city move below. Cars, lights, people living lives that had nothing to do with me. I thought about my grandmother, about the way she'd said, "Choose yourself," as if it were a radical act. I understood now what she meant. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop sacrificing your agency to prove you do. The family story I'd been written into was over. They could keep telling it without me. I was writing something quieter now, smaller, truer, and the hardest part was already done. I'd learned how to stay gone. February arrived with a kind of clarity I wasn't prepared for. Not peace, not closure, just the absence of waiting. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't bracing for the next family call, the next subtle correction, the next moment where love would be used as leverage. That space changed how I moved through the world. I spoke more slowly. I listened without scanning for threat. I slept through the night. That's when the invitation came. It wasn't from my parents or Lily. It was from the past itself, disguised as opportunity. A mid-sized real estate firm in upstate New York reached out through Diane. Family-owned, second generation, struggling with internal succession. They wanted an outside advisor, someone who understood family business dynamics without being emotionally entangled. I laughed when Diane told me, "That's cruelly specific." "That's why you're perfect," she said. I hesitated, not because I couldn't do the work, but because I knew what it would surface. Old patterns, familiar tensions, the quiet war between inheritance and merit. I'll take it, I said finally, on one condition. What's that? I have full authority, and no family member outranks me. She didn't blink. Done. The irony wasn't lost on me. I arrived in Albany on a gray Monday morning. The firm's headquarters sat in a converted brick building, polished but tired. The kind of place that had done well for a long time without evolving. The founding patriarch, Samuel Granger, was long gone. His children ran the business now. 2 sons, 1 daughter, all convinced they deserved more than the others. None willing to say it outright. They reminded me of someone. The first week, I didn't change anything. I observed who interrupted whom, whose emails got answered, whose decisions stalled until a sibling approved them. Power isn't loud. It's assumed. On Friday afternoon, the youngest son cornered me in the hallway. "So whose side are you on?" he asked, half joking. "I'm on the company's side," I replied. He frowned. "That's not how this works." "It is now," I said. That night, back in my hotel room, my phone buzzed. A message from Lily. "Mom wants to see you. She says it's important." I stared at the screen. Important had always meant urgent. Urgent had always meant surrender. I typed, "I'm in New York for work. I can talk next week." She responded almost immediately. "Dad's selling the house." The house. The one I grew up in. The one my grandmother's silverware had sat in. The place where every Christmas photo had been staged. I didn't reply. The following week, the Granger firm imploded on schedule. Not dramatically. Just enough. Missed targets, conflicting directives. A key employee resigned after being scapegoated. I called a meeting. They arrived, defensive, tired, suspicious. This isn't about who gets what I said. It's about whether this business survives your resentment. Silence. You're all operating under the assumption that family entitles you to control. I continued. It doesn't. It entitles you to responsibility. The daughter Elaine spoke up. "Easy for you to say. You're not one of us." I met her eyes. I was, once. That stopped them. By the end of the month, we'd restructured leadership. Clear roles, external accountability, succession tied to performance. Not birth order. It wasn't kind. It was fair. They didn't thank me. They respected me. Back home, March brought a thaw. Literal and emotional. My mother called again. This time, her voice wasn't pleading. It was brittle. "We're downsizing," she said. "I found some of your old things. Donate what you want," I replied. A pause. "Do you want the piano?" I pictured it. Dark wood, slightly out of tune. The bench where I'd sat practicing while Lily played outside. "No," I said. "I don't." That seemed to surprise her. "Okay," she said quietly. After we hung up, I sat with the feeling. Not regret, not loss, just acceptance. Letting go isn't dramatic. It's a series of small refusals. In April, Lily emailed me an ultrasound photo. No message, just the image. I didn't respond immediately. When I did, it was brief. "I hope you're healthy." She replied, "Thank you." That's all. No expectations. No guilt. It was the most honest exchange we'd had in years. At work, Diane pulled me aside one afternoon. "You've changed," she said. "I hope so," I replied. "You're sharper," she continued, "but also less reactive." I thought about it. I stopped negotiating my worth. She nodded, like she understood exactly what that cost. That evening as I walked home, I passed a wedding party spilling out of a church. Laughter, dresses, a bride glowing with anticipation. For a moment, the memory of Lily's wedding flickered through me. The missing seat, the quiet erasure. Then it passed. Some injustices don't need to be avenged loudly. They need to be outgrown. By May, the Granger firm stabilized. They offered me a permanent advisory role. I declined. Not because it wasn't lucrative, but because I'd learned something about endings. Staying too long turns clarity back into compromise. The final escalation came unexpectedly. A courier delivered a thick envelope to my apartment. Return address, my parents' attorney. Inside was a settlement proposal. Not about money, about access. They wanted scheduled contact, holiday rotations, future involvement with Lily's child. A structure. I read it once, then twice. Then I handed it to Janet. No, I said. She smiled slightly. Clean, no. Clean, I confirmed. We responded with a single-page letter, declining the proposal, no counter, no conditions. The silence that followed was different from before. It didn't feel like punishment. It felt like release. That night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city soften into dusk. I thought about revenge, how people imagine it as fire and confrontation and public reckoning. Mine had been quieter. I didn't destroy them. I just stopped holding them together. And in that absence, the truth surfaced on its own. The tables didn't turn in one dramatic moment. They shifted gradually until I was no longer seated at them at all. I had my own now, and for the first time, every chair was chosen, not assigned. June began with heat and a phone call I didn't expect. Not from my parents, not from Lily, from the family lawyer. His voice was cautious, professional, carrying the weight of someone who had just realized he'd been standing on the wrong side of history. Claire, he said, there's been a development regarding the company. I leaned against my kitchen counter, coffee untouched. Go on. Your parents are stepping down, he said, effective immediately. I closed my eyes, not in triumph, but in recognition. This had been building for months. The compliance review, the frozen credit lines, the board's loss of patience. They've appointed an interim CEO, he continued. External. The board wants distance from family involvement. And I asked, and he hesitated. They want to know if you'd consider returning, in an advisory capacity. I smiled faintly. There it was, the circle trying to close itself. No, I said. He cleared his throat. They believe your presence could stabilize things. They believed my absence would be easier, I replied. They can't have both. After we hung up, I stood very still, letting the information settle. I felt no surge of satisfaction, just confirmation. Power always reaches back for the people it dismissed once it realizes what they were carrying. Later that week, Diane invited me to lunch. Not a meeting, just lunch. We sat at a quiet restaurant, the kind where conversations don't echo. She watched me over her salad. You turned down the Holloway board, she said. Yes, most people wouldn't. I know, she nodded. Good. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal. Equity, not inherited, earned. A long-term leadership role with real autonomy. We're expanding into 3 new markets, she said. I want you overseeing all of them. I looked at the numbers. Fair, clean, transparent. When do you need an answer? I asked. When you're ready, she said. That night, I dreamed of my grandmother again. This time, she wasn't in the house. She was sitting at a table, outdoors, sunlight on her face, no papers in sight. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. The next escalation came through Lily. She called late, her voice quiet. The house sold, she said. The old one, I asked. Yes. I waited. They didn't tell me until after she continued. Mom said it was too hard to keep. Dad didn't argue. There was something brittle in her tone. Not anger. Disillusionment. I found some boxes, she added. Your things. Letters. Photos. They almost threw them out. Almost, I repeated. I stopped them, she said quickly. I thought you might want to know. Thank you, I said. And I meant it. There was a pause. Do you ever wonder, she asked softly, if it would have been different if we'd handled things another way? I thought about it, about the countless small chances, the conversations that never happened, the choices made without me. No, I said. I don't. She exhaled. I wish I were more like you. I didn't respond to that. Admiration without accountability is still distance. In July, the company my parents built announced a full rebrand. New name, new leadership, public messaging about innovation and future focus. No mention of legacy, no mention of family. I watched the announcement online and felt nothing. The final shift came when my mother emailed me. Just one sentence. "I don't know who we are without you." I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop. That sentence would have gutted me once, made me rush back to reassure her, to soften the blow, to rebuild something broken at my expense. Now it read differently. If your identity collapses when someone leaves, it was never love. It was dependence. I didn't reply. Instead, I signed Diane's proposal. The months that followed were full, busy, in a way that didn't drain me. I built teams. I mentored women who reminded me of an earlier version of myself. I said no without apology, yes without fear. At a company retreat in September, someone asked me during a breakout session, "How do you deal with betrayal?" The room went quiet. I considered the question. "I stopped trying to correct it," I said, "and I start correcting my position." They nodded, writing it down like a quote. I thought about how strange that was, how pain, when processed honestly, becomes something useful to others. In October, Lily gave birth, a girl. She sent a photo. The baby's face, scrunched eyes, closed tight against the world. I stared at it longer than I expected. She followed with a message. "Her name is Ruth." I swallowed. "Thank you for telling me," I wrote back. Nothing more, nothing less. That winter, my parents moved into a smaller place out of state. I heard it through a cousin. No forwarding address. I didn't search for one. Sometimes people think revenge means watching someone fall. What they don't understand is that the most devastating consequence is irrelevance. I didn't take anything from them they hadn't already given up. I just stopped giving myself away. By the end of the year, my life felt aligned in a way it never had before. Not perfect, not easy, but mine. The open loop that had haunted me for decades had closed quietly. And what replaced it wasn't bitterness. It was authority, the kind that comes from knowing you can walk away and still stand upright. I didn't win. I reclaimed, and that made all the difference. November always used to mean obligation. Flights booked out of habit. Gifts chosen to avoid comments. Conversations rehearsed in my head so I wouldn't say the wrong thing. For most of my life, the end of the year wasn't a pause. It was an endurance test. This November was different. I spent the first week in Chicago, closing a deal that would have terrified the old version of me. Multi-market expansion, aggressive timelines, real money on the line. I didn't second-guess myself. I didn't soften my language to sound agreeable. When a senior partner tried to overstep, I shut it down calmly and moved on. After the meeting, Diane pulled me aside. "You don't flinch anymore," she said. "I flinched for years," I replied. "I'm done." That night, alone in my hotel room, I felt the weight of that truth settle fully. I wasn't reacting to my past anymore. I wasn't proving anything. I was simply operating from my own center. When I got home, a certified envelope was waiting for me. Not from my parents' attorney, from the probate court. I opened it slowly, already knowing what it was. Final accounting, estate fully settled, executor duties concluded. My signature was the last one required to close the file permanently. I sat at my desk for a long time before signing. This was it, the final legal thread tying me to the family structure that had defined me for 3 decades. Once filed, there would be no reason for contact, no open matters, no excuse. I signed my name carefully, not out of reverence, out of finality. The next day, I walked the documents to Janet's office myself. She glanced at them, then at me. "How do you feel?" I considered the question honestly, unburdened. She smiled. "That's usually how it's supposed to end. It just rarely does." On the way out, she added, "For what it's worth, you handled this with restraint. Most people want blood." "I wanted space," I said. "Blood would have kept me stuck." Thanksgiving came quietly. I hosted it this year. Not a replacement, not a statement, just a choice. 6 people, friends from different chapters of my life. No one who shared a last name with me. We cooked together, argued lightly about music, told stories that didn't need footnotes. At one point, as we sat around the table, I realized something subtle but profound. No one was monitoring me. No one was waiting to see if I would overstep, underperform, disappoint, or comply. I wasn't performing a role. I was just there. Later that evening, as I cleaned up alone, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I let it ring. Then a voicemail. It was my father. His voice sounded older than I remembered. Slower. "Claire," he said, "I don't know if you'll listen to this. I just wanted to say, I see now that we asked you to carry things we should have handled ourselves. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that." There was a long pause before the line went dead. I didn't call back, not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish him, but because acknowledgement, without repair, doesn't require response. December arrived with deadlines and year-end reviews. At work, I was promoted again. Quietly, no announcement, just an updated contract and a new scope of authority. I framed nothing. I told no one. Power didn't need witnesses anymore. A week before Christmas, Lily emailed me. No subject line, just a paragraph. She wrote about motherhood, about exhaustion, about how Ruth's middle-of-the-night cries scared her and grounded her at the same time. She wrote that she was starting therapy, that she was beginning to understand how control had been passed down like an heirloom no one questioned. She ended with one sentence. "I don't expect forgiveness. I'm trying to do better." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I wrote back, "I'm glad you're getting support. I wish you well." That was it. No invitation, no reopening, no promise. For the first time, my kindness had boundaries. On Christmas morning, I woke late, made coffee, watched snow fall outside my window. I didn't feel the familiar ache. I didn't feel deprived. I felt intact. In the afternoon, I went for a walk. Couples hurried past with shopping bags. Children dragged sleds. Somewhere families were gathering around tables that looked like mine once had. I didn't envy them. I understood now that not every table is built for you. And forcing yourself to sit at one that diminishes you is not loyalty. It's self-abandonment. That evening, Diane called. "Next year's going to be big," she said. "I hope you're ready." "I am," I replied. After we hung up, I stood by the window. Again, city lights blinking on one by one. I thought about inheritance. Not money. Patterns. Expectations. Silence. I had inherited a role I never agreed to. The fixer. The steady one. The one who made things work no matter the cost. And then I declined it. That was the real payback. Not the assets. Not the authority. Not watching anyone struggle. The real revenge was refusing to pass that role onto myself ever again. I didn't rewrite my family's story. I exited it. And in that exit, I finally claimed authorship of my own. The year was ending, and for the first time, I wasn't bracing for what came next. I was choosing it. January arrived without ceremony. No fireworks. No dramatic resolutions. Just a calendar turning over and a quiet sense that something fundamental had shifted. I didn't mark the new year with promises. I marked it with distance. The first week back at work was intense. Budgets, forecasts, hiring decisions that would shape the next 3 years. I moved through it all with a steady focus that surprised even me. Pressure used to make me shrink. Now it sharpened me. One afternoon, Diane asked me to sit in on an executive review as an observer. Halfway through, a senior VP dismissed a junior manager's concern with a wave of his hand. "We'll handle that later," he said. I leaned forward. "No," I said calmly. "We won't." The room went quiet. "That issue affects Q3 compliance," I continued. "If we don't address it now, we'll be cleaning up a mess we could have prevented. No apology, no justification, just clarity." Diane caught my eye and smiled slightly. Later she said, "You didn't ask permission." "I didn't need it," I replied. That was new, and it felt earned. Outside of work, life simplified itself. I stopped explaining my choices to people who didn't have a vote. I declined invitations without excuses. I said yes, only when I meant it. The noise thinned. Then, unexpectedly, the past reached out one more time. Not through my parents, through my Aunt Margaret. She called on a Sunday afternoon, her voice cautious, but familiar. "I hope this isn't a bad time." "It's fine," I said. She hesitated. "Your mother's been struggling, not medically, just emotionally." I waited. "She keeps saying she doesn't recognize you anymore." Margaret continued. "She says you've changed." "I have," I replied. "That scares her." "I considered that. It used to scare me too." Margaret sighed. "She thinks you've hardened." I looked out the window at the city, bright and indifferent. "I think I've clarified." There was a pause. "Do you think there's any chance?" Margaret began, then stopped. "No," I said gently. "Not right now." After we hung up, I felt no guilt, just confirmation. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always call your boundaries cruelty. In February, Lily sent another update. Short. Ruth had smiled for the first time in days. Pediatrician said she was healthy. Lily sounded steadier, less frantic, like someone learning to stand without leaning. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. It felt appropriate. The real turning point came later that month in a place I didn't expect. A women's leadership panel invited me to speak. Small audience, mostly mid-career professionals. The moderator asked about my background. I didn't tell the whole story. I didn't need to. When someone in the audience asked, "How do you deal with family betrayal?" the room stilled. I took a moment. I stopped treating access to me as unconditional, I said. I realized love that requires silence isn't love. It's control. Heads nodded. A few people looked relieved. After the panel, a woman in her 60s approached me. Gray hair, sharp eyes. "I wish I'd learned that earlier," she said. "It took me 40 years. I smiled. It still counts. That night, alone at home, I thought about revenge again. People imagine it as confrontation, exposure, a final speech where everyone finally understands what they did wrong. But real life doesn't work like that. Most people never fully understand. They rationalize. They minimize. They rewrite the story so they can live with themselves. Waiting for their comprehension keeps you tethered. I had cut the tether. In March, my father sent one final message. No subject. No greeting. "I'm proud of you." I read it once. Then I archived it. Pride offered after exclusion doesn't restore what was taken. It just acknowledges the loss too late to matter. I didn't respond. Spring crept in slowly. Longer days. Lighter mornings. I started running again, something I'd stopped during the worst of the conflict. My body felt different. Less braced, more present. One evening, after a long run, I sat on the steps of my building, catching my breath, and realized something quietly astonishing. I trusted myself, not in the abstract motivational sense, in a practical way. I trusted my judgment, my timing, my ability to walk away from what harms me without theatrics or justification. That trust had been eroded over years of being told I was too sensitive, too rigid, too much not enough. It was back now. At work, I was asked to mentor a group of younger women. During our first session, one of them asked, "How do you know when to fight and when to leave?" I answered without hesitation. "You fight when the system can change and you want to stay. You leave when staying requires you to disappear. She wrote it down like it was a rule she'd been missing. That night, I thought about my grandmother again, about how quietly she'd seen everything, how she'd waited until I was ready to see it too. She hadn't saved me. She'd positioned me. The final confirmation came in late April. I was offered a seat on an external advisory board, not connected to my family, not connected to my past, a role based entirely on my expertise and judgment. As I signed the acceptance letter, it struck me that this was what agency felt like. Not permission, not validation, choice. I hadn't won against my family. I had won myself back, and that victory didn't need witnesses. It just needed consistency. The story that began with exclusion was ending with authorship, and for the first time, I was writing the terms. The last thing I let go of wasn't my family. It was the need for them to understand. That realization came on an ordinary Tuesday in May, the kind of day that would have disappeared into the background of my old life. I was sitting in my office, reviewing a contract, sunlight hitting the edge of my desk, when it occurred to me that no part of my day involved bracing myself. No emotional armor, no preemptive explanations, no quiet calculations about how my choices would land with people who had already decided who I was allowed to be. That was new, and it was final. The advisory board role settled into place quickly. The work was thoughtful, strategic, clean. No family business drama. No inherited resentment masquerading as tradition. Just decisions, consequences, and respect. When I spoke, people listened because they had chosen to, not because they felt obligated. One afternoon, after a long meeting, a colleague asked me where I'd learned to stay so calm under pressure. I almost said nowhere. Then I corrected myself. I learned what happens when you don't, I said. Summer came quietly. Lily sent occasional updates. Ruth learned to grab her own toes. Lily learned to sit with discomfort instead of outsourcing it. I watched from a distance, not detached, but no longer entangled. My parents didn't reach out again. I heard through relatives that they were adjusting. Smaller routines, fewer gatherings, a life that fit the choices they'd made. I didn't feel satisfaction about that, just symmetry. People often confuse karma with punishment. Real karma is alignment. The truth catching up to the story. In August, I took my first real vacation in years. No laptop, no emergency contacts. I rented a small place near the coast, woke up early, walked barefoot on sand that didn't care who my family was or what I'd given up to keep them comfortable. On the third morning, sitting alone with coffee, I thought back to the moment that started everything. The missing seat at the wedding rehearsal. The small, quiet humiliation that had been so easy to dismiss. That's how control works. It doesn't arrive with shouting. It arrives as inconvenience, as exclusion framed as oversight, as love that requires you to shrink a little more each time. I hadn't lost my family all at once. I'd been trained to disappear slowly. The revenge wasn't loud. There was no confrontation scene that wrapped everything up neatly. No courtroom triumph that forced apologies out of unwilling mouths. Instead, there was paperwork, distance, boundaries enforced without speeches, a lawyer called at the right time, a signature placed carefully on the correct line, a phone left unanswered, a no delivered cleanly without justification. That's how power shifts in real life. Not through drama, through follow-through. In September, I ran into someone from my old town while traveling for work. She asked how my parents were, how Lily was, how the family business was doing. I smiled politely. I don't know, I said. I'm not involved anymore. She looked startled. Oh, I thought, I know, I said gently. A lot of people did, and that was it. No explanation, no defense, just truth. Later that night, I realized something that would have terrified me once. I didn't need anyone to see me as the good daughter anymore, or the reasonable one, or the strong one. Those identities had cost too much. In October, I spoke at another panel, this one larger. Afterward, a woman in her 70s took my hand. My sister took everything she said. The inheritance, the house, the family business. I stayed quiet to keep the peace. I wish I hadn't. I squeezed her hand back. It's never too late to choose yourself, I said, even if the choice is internal. She nodded, eyes wet but steady. That's when I understood who these stories are really for. Not the people who wronged us, the ones still deciding whether silence is worth the price. By the end of the year, my life looked nothing like it used to. New work, new rhythms, fewer people, better ones. I wasn't healed in the fairy tale sense. I still felt things. I still had memories. But I wasn't controlled by them. I had learned the difference between love and obligation, between family and access, between forgiveness and self-betrayal. The lesson wasn't complicated. If someone only loves you when you comply, they don't love you. They manage you, and you don't owe anyone your disappearance. I didn't rebuild my family. I rebuilt my boundaries. That was enough. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been excluded, manipulated, or quietly erased by people who called it love, you're not alone, and you're not wrong for wanting more. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight. It's to leave the table, take your dignity with you, and build a life where you're no longer asking for permission to exist. If you found yourself in this story, take a moment, like it, share it, leave a comment if you want to tell your own. And if you're not ready to speak yet, that's okay too. Just don't stay silent forever. Your life is yours, and choosing yourself is not betrayal. It's survival.